All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome back to the Tuesday night Torah class. This week's Torah portion is the Torah portion of Vayeitzei. Literally translated, the word Vayeitzei means, and he went out and he left. Before we get into the Torah portion, I'd just like to mention that tonight is the 9th of Kislev. The 9th of Kislev is a special day, an auspicious day on the Chabad calendar. It is the birthday and yahrtzeit of the second Chabad Rebbe, known as the Mitteler Rebbe, which means the middle Rebbe. His name was Rabbi DovBer Schneuri. He was the generation before the name Schneuri was adopted. He was Rabbi DovBer Schneuri. He was born in Russia, or somewhere in that area, in the year Tuf Kuf Lamed Daled 5734. 5534, which corresponds to 1773, and he passed away on the same day, the same Hebrew day, in Tafkuf Pei Ches 5588, 1827. So he was a great leader, and he the second leader of Chabad. And he, sorry about that.
Rabbi, what's the date today? The 9th of what?
Tonight is the 9th of Kislev. Tonight and tomorrow is the 9th of Kislev. The Mitteler Rebbe, the second Chabad Rebbe, Rabbi DovBer, was very famous for a number of things. One unique aspect about him, which was different than his predecessor, his father, the founder of Chabad Hasidism, was that he went at great length to discuss esoteric concepts. His books number in the tens of books. He did go on for pages on end explaining a very narrow, very specific concept, and he just go pages on pages in order to explain it to even a lay person, someone who's never studied Torah, who's never studied the esoteric aspect of Torah Hasidism, as well as he actually wrote certain volumes of his Hasidic teachings. He wrote them for specific students who were involved in specific situations or needed a unique path in their service of God. He wrote some of his books were written in their honor, which is a unique concept and wasn't really done by any other of the Hasidic leaders. He began leading and guiding students at a very young age. At the age of 16, his father appointed him to be a mashpia, a spiritual guide for the younger followers of Chabad. And he became Rebbe following his father's passing in the early winter of 1812, the end of 1812, or beginning 1813. The Hebrew date was 5573. In the year 5573, 1812, 1813, he assumed leadership of Chabad. And as a matter of fact, he was the first Rebbe to dwell permanently in the city, the small hamlet, the small village of Lubavitch, which is the alternate name for Chabad. Chabad is the philosophy. Lubavitch is the city where we originated. So we didn't really originate in Lubavitch, but for over 100 years, that was the headquarters, so to speak, of Chabad, and so it became known as Lubavitch, the court of Lubavitch. He was the first one to move to Lubavitch shortly after his father's passing and set down roots there in Lubavitch. He's famous for a lot of things, and just to repeat one teaching of his before we move on to the Torah portion. Following his father's appointing of him at the age of 16 to be a spiritual guide, he was famously known for guiding the youngsters and encouraging them to farbrengen. And a farbrengen, as we've discussed many times, a farbrengen is where Hasidim, fellow Jews, gather together and they talk what's on their heart to inspire each other, to offer constructive criticism and encourage each other to strengthen themselves in their commitment and devotion to Judaism. And so he once explained, the Rabbi DovBer of Lubavitch, the Mitteler Rebbe once explained that why is a farbrengen so important? Why is talking together about these concepts and to encourage each other to study Torah so important? Because when one is working with themselves to overcome their internal evil inclination, it's a fear battle. It's the good inclination against the evil inclination. But when they work with a friend, it is two good inclinations overpowering a single evil inclination. And why is that? Why don't we say it's two? It's still an equal battle, 2 against 2, because the evil inclination is very selfish. It wants its materialistic goals, and that's all it cares about. It couldn't care less about another's evil inclination and animalistic soul. Whereas the godly soul, the good inclination, the godly soul works in tandem with any other godly soul because its goal is selfless. Its goal is to accomplish the better good and the greater good for not only itself, but for any other person it comes in contact with. And if so, when there's two people working together to eradicate the animalistic tendencies and to refine the character traits, it turns out, as the Mitteler Rebbe explained, it is two godly souls overpowering and against and overpowering the single animalistic soul, and that enables one to easily overcome their animalistic soul. Moving right along to the Torah portion of Vayeitzei. Vayeitzei discusses a number of ideas, and the general storyline is the story of Jacob. We ended off last week's Torah portion, the famous story of Yaakov, Jacob, receiving the blessings from his father in place of his brother Esav, and Esav being really upset at him and vowing to kill Yaakov. Rebecca, Rivka, their mother, with prophetic vision, seeing this vow that her son had made, she calls Jacob and tells him, leave Be'er Sheva, which is where they lived in Israel, and travel east towards Haran, which is a place where Rivka was from, to find a suitable match for Yaakov. And this week's Torah portion begins. Yaakov leaves. He leaves his hometown of Be'er Sheva and travels to Haran. On the way, he takes a rest at Mount Moriah, the Temple Mount, and he has a famous dream of Jacob's ladder where he sees the angels that were escorting him in Israel were leaving him, and the new set of angels were coming down the ladder to escort him in the diaspora outside of Israel. And he said, and God gives him a blessing and says that the land upon which you rest will be given to you as a blessing, as a gift to you and your descendants. He wakes up startled and says, I did not know that this is a place of God. And he builds an altar and a monument to God, pledging that this place will be made the house of God. Once he gets to Haran, Yaakov stays with his uncle, later to become his father-in-law, Lavan, who was not a good person, who was a swindler. And long story short, after being there for 20 years, Jacob leaves Haran with an entourage of his entire family. He has 11 children and 2 wives and 2 concubines. Rachel and Leah, famous, our matriarchs, the final 2 of the matriarchs, following Sarah and Rebecca, first 2 of the matriarchs, and Bilhah and Zilpah, who the 4 of them together mothered his 13 children, 12 sons of 12 tribes, and Dinah, their daughter. The Torah portion ends off with Yaakov leaving Lavan. He had to escape because Lavan wasn't allowing him to leave. He had to escape, and Lavan chased him. Lavan found him. And Lavan said, why are you leaving as if you're a thief in the middle of the night? And Lavan says, I'd like to make a pact with you that no evil, we shall do no evil to each other. And the Torah portion ends off with them making that pact. And so we're going to discuss one aspect of this week's Torah portion, and it is actually the first verse. In order to understand this concept, we'll begin with a perfect example for this topic. And that example is in the name of the class, which was rooting out recidivism. The idea of recidivism is something that we are all, unfortunately, familiar with. The fact that the prison system in the United States, or really in the world over, is not perfect, to say the least. And why is that? The studies show that roughly about 40% of offenders will end up in prison once again. which is an astronomical number considering that the idea of prison is in order to enable them to better themselves and to change themselves. Which leads us to the question that when crime is committed, how do we react? What is the proper response to crime? If we look at it from an intellectual view, there are two general responses. And who knows which one is right? The first one is to suppress that individual. Put him in prison, lock him away behind bars, because if we do that, we'll ensure that he won't be on the street. Nothing is going to happen with that person while he is behind bars. Those who are not so excited about that idea, law enforcement and prisons and so on, is because what are you accomplishing? That person who comes out of prison 15 years later, they're the same person, and even worse after those 15 years. What did we accomplish by putting them behind bars for that many years, days, months, whatever it may be? And I wanted to share today, but I wasn't able to bring it up before the class. I just saw it now. But it was a great article on the satire website, The Onion, which kind of makes fun of this idea of our expectancy that prison should rehabilitate an individual. That's the first side of the coin, the immediate response. Throw them in the slammer. Then the second reaction is, no, it's not as important. It's not that important. What's important is to educate them. You have an offender, you have a criminal, educate them, try to better them, trying to change them and make them a better person to ensure it doesn't happen again. And those who counter that say, but what are you going to do in the meantime? Or you got to be tough on crime. If not, people are going to find loopholes. People are going to take, people are going to overuse or exploit this idea and keep themselves out of prison. And it's a tough question. And obviously neither of them are the answer. We have to find an equal balance between the two. But the idea of rehabilitation, the idea of education, changing the person from within, and that ensures or enables a person in the crime to be better, seems to be maybe a better option. And prison reform has been a big case, a bipartisan, thank God, case here in the United States for the past many years, and there's been some big movements in that direction in the past couple of years. Where does this take us into this week's Torah portion? Where it takes us is as follows. As in everything in the world, all questions, we look to the Torah to see what does Torah say about this topic. And the idea is, what does Torah say about this topic, to give us an informed understanding of Torah's view and to enable us to have an informed decision on these general concepts. And so we'll begin with the first verse of this week's Torah portion. After receiving the blessings from his father, Jacob leaves his father's presence, and his brother Esau enters and finds out that his brother Jacob had taken the blessings from him. He receives a smaller blessing, and then he goes ahead and vows to kill his brother, leaving Jacob with no other choice other than skipping town, fleeing for his life, and moving on to Haran to his uncle for a safe haven, and later to find his wife. And so we begin in this week's Torah portion, text 1, the first verse of this week's Torah portion. And Jacob left Be'er Sheva, and he went to Haran. Simple reason, running away for his life. However, the Midrash gives an alternate explanation, a different reason. And a little background about this other reason. What was this city? What was the name of the city that Jacob left? It's right here. He left Be'er Sheva. Why is it called Be'er Sheva? In Hebrew, Be'er means a well. Sheva can mean 7, but Sheva can also mean an oath. Why? What does it have to do with an oath? So the story is that in the previous Torah portions, we have a story of Avraham and of Isaac. Beginning with Avraham, he goes south from where he was, southwest, and he heads to a little kingdom called Gerar. Gerar, Philistia, was a little kingdom in south of modern day Israel, southwest of modern day Israel is where it was situated, and it was ruled by the king Avimelech. Now, Avram and Avimelech got into a quarrel because Avram would dig wells for his family and flock in the land, and the local Philistines would stuff up these wells. And so after this happened a number of times, this led to skirmishes between Avram's family and the local population. Avram approaches the Philistine king, Avimelech, and he demands justice, and they negotiate and they accept a truce. And the truce is that they will erect a monument for their truce, and the truce is that they won't cause any of these skirmishes again. That truce is the reason for the name of Be'er Sheva. It was a well of an oath, a truce that was made between them. As the verse itself states in prior Torah portions, text 2, and Avram contended with Avimelech about the well of water that the servants of Avimelech had forcibly seized. Avimelech said, I do not know who did this thing, neither did you tell me, nor did I hear of it until today. Avram took flocks and cattle and gave them to Avimelech, and they both formed a covenant. Therefore, he named that place Be'er Sheva, for there they both swore. They made an oath, a truce, that's kind of a ceasefire. And they formed a covenant of Be'er Sheva, and Avimelech and Pichol, his general, arose, and they returned to the land of the Philistines. Fast forward a generation, and almost the same exact thing happened. If you recall, Avram had dug these wells. Yitzchak, Isaac, his son, traveled south, also to Philistia, to Gerar, in the kingdom of Avimelech. And again, they start quarreling with Yitzchak, and they start stuffing up his wells, and he continues to dig more wells, redig the wells that his father dug. As the verse tells us in the next Torah portion, and Isaac again dug the wells of water, which they had dug in the days of his father Avram, and the Philistines had stopped them up after Abraham's death, and he gave them names like the names that his father had given them. He named the wells. And Isaac's servants dug in the valley, and they found there a well of living waters, and the shepherds of Gerar quarreled with Isaac's shepherds, saying, the water is ours. So he named the well Asek, because they had contended with him, and that's what the word in Hebrew Asek means. And he went up from there to Be'er Sheva, and Avimelech went to him from Gerar, and a group of his companions and Pichol his general. And they said, we have seen that God was with you. So we said, let there now be an oath between us, between ourselves and you, and let us form a covenant with you. And he named it Shiva, he named that well Shiva. Therefore, the city is named Be'er Sheva until this day. And as a matter of fact, it's literally until this day, there is the city of Be'er Sheva in Israel. And so it was because of this past in that city of Be'er Sheva, getting back to our original storyline, that Yaakov, says the Medrash, was forced to flee. Why did this cause him to flee? Why did the oath, the pact that was made between Avimelech, the truce that was made between Avimelech and his grandfather Abraham and his father Isaac, is what caused him to leave? In the words of the Midrash, Rabbi Yudan said, the verse is to be read, and Jacob fled from the wells of oaths. Namely, Jacob said to himself, I don't want Avimelech, king of the Philistines, to approach me and say, swear to me as your father and grandfather did. He was running away. He did not want to make a truce with Avimelech. Odd, isn't it? Isn't it all about peace? Isn't a truce a wonderful thing? Isn't a ceasefire a good thing? He had to run away from it? What's the big deal? Why was Yaakov afraid of making an agreement with Avimelech, so much so that it compelled him to run away literally from home? If it was good enough for Avram and Yitzchak, and that truce was a good thing for Avram and Yitzchak to do, his father and grandfather, how bad can it already be? Why was Yaakov so terrified of making such an agreement? What was he really trying to avoid? There must be something deeper than what's seen at face value about these truths about the ceasefires, about these agreements and oaths that were taken between his father and grandfather Isaac and Abraham and Avimelech, the king of Gerar, that Yaakov was trying to avoid. And so in the following section, we'll proceed to a discussion in the Hasidic point of view about how to combat negative forces. Negative forces, we have them in all different manners. Negative forces we have in the world. There's the evil in the world. There's wars. There's enemies. There's bad people, and so on and so forth. And then there's the internal negative forces. We all have them. Naturally, we're born with them. The evil inclination, the animalistic soul, the animalistic tendencies that we all have. So by some it's more revealed, by some it's more hidden, but it's all there. Each one of us. How do we counter those negative forces? How do we subdue our inner urges and temptations that, generally speaking, don't want us to do what's good for us, right? Everyone, even something as seemingly benign as just sitting back, relaxing and enjoying life and doing nothing, twiddling our thumbs, eating, drinking, being merry, just enjoy life. That itself isn't something negative in and of itself, but it's something which sometimes can counter our positivity, our positive forces. It's easier to just relax, sit back and relax. And so how do we counter, especially when it comes to the real negative forces, something internally that says don't do this, or if we're in a mood that's telling us to do something or not to do something, or we have a literal enemy who's trying to stop us from doing something positive or to do something negative. How do we counter that negative force? Hasidus teaches us that there are two types of countering negative forces. One is called iskafia, or suppression, loosely translated, suppression. The other is called ishapcha, transformation. What are these two types? The first approach is, take for example, a depressed person. Someone who's depressed, not clinically depressed, they have to get real medical attention. Someone who's at the moment sad, whatever it may be. Maybe he's sad because the stock market crashed. Maybe he's sad because his investments failed. Obviously today was a good day, thank God, in the stocks. But for whatever reason, this individual is sad. How does he counter it? He decides, you know what? There's a wedding of a cousin of mine. I really don't want to go. I'm not in the mood. I'm not feeling it. It's been a tough day. It's been a rough day. It's not for me. I'm not interested in it. But he decides and he says, you know what? I'm going to go anyhow. And he walks into the wedding hall and there's some people there and there's a beat and there's dancing and he starts looking around and slowly but surely he gets elevated. Slowly but surely he gets excited. Slowly but surely he gets schlepped into that circle and he starts dancing with his uncle, with his cousin, with his friend, and with his brother. And he's dancing with the groom and he's excited. And he forgets about that sad feeling. What was that going into the wedding? Was that transformation or was that suppression? It was suppression. He hasn't dealt with the negative feelings. He hasn't dealt with the cause of the negative feelings. He's just suppressing them. And you know what's going to happen? He goes back into his car after the wedding. He comes home. He'll take a look at his portfolio or the next morning. And again, he's going to fall into that same state of depression because he hasn't worked on it. It's been suppressed. But you know what? Even that suppression is doing something because it may cause him to have a more positive outlook, and hopefully it will force him into, either subconsciously or subconsciously, to try to see the lighter side of things, a more positive side of things. But in and of itself is not the ultimate. It's not really where it's at. You can say the same thing about religion. Take Jack. Jack isn't so excited about religion. Putting on tefillin every day is not his excitement for whatever reason. And then he decides that he's going to go with his Chabad rabbi, and he's going to come with the rabbi to the rabbinical conference that happens every year in New York. And he spends a weekend with 5,000 rabbis, and he's dancing and jumping when they're singing, and he's listening to the speeches and the orators and the lectures, and he's inspired, and he gets uplifted, and he decides, you know what? I'm going to put on tefillin every single day. And he comes back to California. And he starts and he puts on tefillin the first day, the second day. You know what's going to happen? That feeling of excitement, of euphoria, of joy may dissipate. Because it was suppression of his feelings or his understanding that this is why I don't do it, or this is why I do it, and so on and so forth. What he really needs is something deeper. Not just outward superficial excitement, which can lead to something deeper. He needs something which is really deep. Which leads us to an interesting text. And that is from the book of Tanya, the seminal book of Chabad Hasidus, the foundational book of Chabad Hasidus, written by the founder of Chabad, Rabbi Schneuri Zalman of Liad. The name Tanya is one name of the book, but there's an alternate name. The name that the Alter Rebbe actually gave to the book, and that is called Sefer Shel Beinanim, the book of the in-betweener, the book of the everyday man. It's a book for everyone. And he explains that this idea of suppression is really where it's at, because ultimately, deep down, we all have an animalistic soul. We can't get rid of it. It's going to be there. What we could do is suppress its feelings, suppress its character traits, suppress its wants and needs, that it wants us to do things which aren't in line with what God wants us to do. Push those feelings aside and do only what the godly soul wants. What we're accomplishing is not getting rid of it. We're just putting it to sleep. We're keeping it aside. And it might wake up. It will wake up. And it'll give us those feelings and those thoughts and try to push us to do more. But we can overcome it. We can overcome it by putting it back to sleep, by suppressing it once again. In the words of the Alter Rebbe, text 5. Reciting Shema or other parts of prayer is a spiritually opportune time for all. It is then that one can fixate their mind on the greatness of God and rouse their heart with fiery flames of love, motivating themselves to cleave to God by fulfilling his mitzvot and studying the Torah out of love. At that point, the evil vested in the left chamber of their heart is suppressed by the goodness that has spread from the right chamber of the heart, which is influenced by the mind, which is in turn bound up with the greatness of God. Prayer. It's that magical time when the godly soul gets fired up, the engines are revving, it's all excited for its connection to God, and it sweeps everything along. It suppresses that feeling. The Beinoni, this middle ground person, this in-betweener, may not always pray with such fervor, with such excitement, but there are times when they do reach such intensity, and they merit to schlep along their animalistic tendencies in the process. They put it to sleep. But it's not a complete transformation. It's just suppression. It's just that, as we read here. It is suppressed by the goodness that has spread from the right chamber of their heart. At some point later on, when the effects of prayer cool off, that animalistic side, those animalistic tendencies will come back. As the Alter Rebbe continues, after prayer, the evil impulses can easily come back, mixing with goodness to challenge a person as they walk through the darkness of this world. So it's going to come back. They didn't get rid of it. We just suppressed it for that time. Not to say that prayer won't have lingering effects. There will be lingering effects. It's if you take a sleeping pill and you fall asleep, when you wake up, there's still some of that drowsiness there. There's still the lingering effects. When you do prayer, yes, prayer subdues the animalistic soul. It suppresses the animalistic tendencies, and it gets rid of them. And then later, once the prayer wears off, That excitement is not just prayer. It's those moments of excitement and godliness and our connection to God and our soul and who we are. We get excited. We're connected to God. We get excited. We're holy. We're Jewish. We have an important mission in this world. We have a responsibility in this world. And we're all excited and fired up with this mission. Those moments of excitement will dissipate and the animalistic tendencies will come back. But you know what? Those moments of excitement linger, even when the animalistic soul comes back. The words of the Alter Rebbe, the impact of the spiritual heights reached during prayer remain lingering in the mind. Coupled with the innate love and fear of God latent in the heart, they can effectively overpower and control evil. So not all is lost even after prayer. It's still there. But the animalistic tendency hasn't been transformed. It's just incident. That's one way of taking care of negativity. We suppress it. We don't do anything with it. We don't treat it. We put a Band-Aid over it. We push it aside. We throw the criminal into the slammer. We don't do anything about it. We don't try to transform it. We just push it aside and hope that it stays aside, it stays out of trouble for a long enough time for us to accomplish some good before it comes back into power. Which leads us to the second way of dealing with negative forces, and that is transformation. Transformation, literally, let's take that first example that we mentioned about the individual who's depressed, who's sad about something that happened that day. Instead of going to the wedding, what does he do? Puts on a jacket, goes outside, got his headphones, got his phone, his keys, a cup of water, a cup of tea, and takes a nice walk down the street. And he thinks about his day. And he thinks about how, yes, it was a rough day, but he's got a family to be thankful for. He's got a soul to be thankful for. He's healthy, he's happy. All right, there's a bump in the way. Is that something that should get me down? No. Once he has that attitude, now we can start thinking of, you know what? Maybe next time when I do my investments, he now has a clear head to make different decisions, not to let it get him down. And he deals with it. And he calls his broker and he says, look, I want to diversify my portfolio a little bit better to ensure that this doesn't happen across the board. I want to make sure that it doesn't affect me as much. Or in a case where a parent is dealing with a troubled child, a troubled teenager. There's that feeling of melancholy, of depression, of anger sometimes. And then we can say, you know what are we doing about it? Let's take a deep breath, let's relax. There's two ways of dealing with that anger. We can either try to force the teenager to do what we want them to do, or the parents can now work with the teenager, work with their qualities, work with the teenager's capabilities and strengths, and try to hone them and channel those strengths into the right direction. That's called transformation. When someone gets angry, what does that show us? That the individual is passionate. We can suppress that passion, we can suppress that anger and say, don't get angry. Or we can say, utilize that passion for something good. Go take that passion, in ourselves, for example. We don't talk to other people, we talk to ourselves and we say, I have a passion, I get angry, road rage, whatever it may be. Let me take that passion, unleash that passion, unleash that beast that comes out sometimes as a short fuse, and utilize it for something good, something positive. I'm going to throw myself into the local charity and get involved and begin a new project. And with that fervor, that passion that I usually have when it comes to anger, I'm going to transform that into passion for something positive. That's transformation. It's not suppression. It's a lot harder, but the effect is a lot longer lasting. It's infinite. Same thing when it comes to war, not just internal war as we've been discussing, but war. There's two types of war, right? Conventional warfare, guns, planes, bombs, just carpet bomb them. Some people like to say, just get in there and clean it out. But you didn't you didn't transform the enemy, you suppressed the enemy. Give it a year, give it 5 years, give it 10 years, the enemy's going to be back in full force. Unfortunately, as we've been seeing in the past few decades, the enemy just keeps on coming back. I'm not giving any military strategy, but it's definitely a side to look at. Suppression isn't necessarily the answer. But then it comes to a transformation, working with an enemy to help them understand the enemy's view of life, the enemy's culture, each understanding each other, each working with each other to better each other's infrastructure, to better each other's economy, to better each other and to help each other and so on. For example, somewhat Japan and the United States following World War II. They were bitter enemies. And in a short few years, they became the best of allies. Mutual understanding, mutual feeling. Now, you may say that it works both. You got to do both. You got to be, they dropped the atom bomb. And that's what enabled them to come to the table, to have these discussions, to change and to have these. That may be, but it's definitely the other side of the coin, that there has to be that understanding in order, and we have to go deeper, not just suppression, not just putting them in the slammer, not just locking him up, but there has to be the education of the criminal, utilizing the first example that we used. And a good example is in Norway, which is commonly used in this prison reform discussion. In Norway, recidivism is only at 20%, half the amount as it is in the United States. And why is that? Because they invest so much on education and rehabilitation of the criminals that enables them to have that percentage at a much better rate than here in the United States. So that idea of going to the core, of working with the core, of enabling them to, of enabling them. Just a moment. Of enabling them to work with the criminals at the base of it, that enables that it changes it for the good, it changes it for the better for many, many, many years. This idea of transformation leads us to an interesting teaching in the ethics of our fathers, which is understood at face value to be the idea of suppression, but with a Hasidic twist from the Baal Shem Tov, it actually teaches us the idea of transformation. And we'll move right along to text 8, from the ethics of our fathers. Who is mighty? He who conquers his evil inclination. As it is said, he who is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and he who rules his spirit is better than he who takes a city. Now, at face value, analyzing this teaching from the ethics of our fathers, who is mighty? He who conquers his evil inclination, may seem to be referring to suppression. He conquers it, breaks it, gets rid of it. It's done. It's over with, right? Getting rid of the enemy, carpet bombing his evil inclination. He gets rid of it. But the Baal Shem Tov says, no, it's all in the nuance. It's all in the specific terms used here. Text 9. Baal Shem Tov, the founder of Hasidism, the Baal Shem Tov commented on the Mishnah. It doesn't say break his inclination. Rather, it says conquer. To break the evil inclination is not a display of real strength. All it takes to break the evil inclination is common sense, which dictates that personal evil tendencies ought to be broken. It's common sense. It doesn't show strength. The idea of conquering is to utilize one's energies and character traits, for there is much more grain with the power of the ox, namely, the animal within is a powerful engine, even greater than the godly soul. Such a person behaves with strength. This then is the Mishnah's dictum. Who is mighty? One who appropriates the force of his evil inclination and uses it for holiness. The metaphor used earlier of the example used before of anger. The breaking of the anger is saying, don't ever get passionate about something. Don't ever get angry anymore. That's the breaking of the inclination. The conquering of the inclination is what takes strength. It takes nuance. It takes working with the evil inclination, the animalistic soul. And says, no, don't get rid of the anger. Don't suppress the anger. Don't suppress the passion. Redirect it. Utilize it. Utilize that strength. Utilize that passion for something good, for something holy, for something special. Work with what you have. Don't break it. Work with it. And such an approach is a gift to those who struggle, and each one of us struggles with something, with some personality trait that we'd like to better, some personality trait that some of us feel we'd like to get rid of, some feeling, something directed towards someone or directed towards something inside of us that we say, you know what, it's deficient. It's something I'd like to work on. It's not something good. This view is saying not break, but conquer, utilize it, is something very powerful. As the Alter Rebbe explains, some people are naturally drawn to academia. Such people channel all their emotion and passion into it, and they focus all of their intellectual power into it. Their very nature from birth drives a tremendous passion for knowledge. It's one type of person. Then there are others who, as much as they may understand what they study, do not take particular pleasure in it to the extent that they should actually really think about it. Rather, they prefer to run after whatever it is their heart desires all day. And the Alter Rebbe is using this as an example for someone who is naturally melancholy, and explains that those who are naturally, who have this predisposition to revert to depression or melancholy, obviously not clinical depression, is a good idea for them, explains the Alter Rebbe, is for them to go into the academia and to study Torah, because they can utilize those character traits which comes with that idea and deviate from melancholy to study to academia, to reading books, to studying Torah. It comes from the same root. And the Rebbe would refer to this passage from the Alter Rebbe very often in letters. And here's an example where the Rebbe writes, "You write that you are besieged with melancholy thoughts. Though I find this somewhat surprising, if it is happening, well, you know what is stated in Torah, or in that book that we just quoted in text 10, melancholy can also drive rigorous study, especially Torah study." This exact idea. Don't break the melancholy, conquer it. Don't break the anger, conquer it. You're passionate about something, you're passionate about anger. Redirect it, conquer it, and utilize it for your benefit. Work with what you have. And so what we have here is that there are two general approaches. First one is suppress it with overwhelming force. Second one is transformation. Suppression is explained as something which is not long lasting. It's something which is superficial. It does affect for a short period of time. It does have a positive effect, but for a short period of time, it's not deep. But then there's transformation. Transformation is we harness the negativity into something positive. It takes hard work, really hard. It can take a lifetime, but the results are long lasting. Utilizing that first example of prison, throwing someone in prison is a lot easier. It's quick, it's easy. It doesn't do the job. Working with the individual, changing them, will have long-lasting effects. And an interesting example, a colleague just pointed out to me right before the class, was that in 1993, Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs, who just passed about 2.5 weeks ago, former chief rabbi of the UK and Commonwealth from 1993 to 2000, from 1991 to 2003, 2013, if I'm not mistaken, or 92 to 2013. Either way, shortly after he became chief rabbi, there was a terrible story that happened in the UK of, if I recall correctly, it was 2 10-year-olds who kidnapped and murdered a younger child. 2 10-year-olds. And it was headlines, and it was, if anyone recalls such a story, please feel free to drop it in the chat box if I'm confusing some of the details, but if I recall, that was the story. And the Jews in England, in the Commonwealth, looked at their new chief rabbi for some direction. And what Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs explained was that what's necessary, he wrote an article, it was published all over, that what's necessary is to change the soul of the nation. The youth of the generation is missing the nuclear family. They're missing the moral guide, the moral compass. They're missing God in their lives, which leads to ethics, proper morals. And once that is changed, as the youth will grow older, they'll become better people, more committed to society, more committed to doing what's right. And then he points out the key word: it may take 2 decades to change the youth. It's not going to happen overnight. But if it's worked on collectively, by changing it from the youngest of age in the school systems to explain the importance of the nuclear family, to explain the importance of having God in your life, to explain the importance of having proper morals and ethics, not academia. That's not what should be focused on. Then it may take 2 decades, but the world will be a better place. And that's exactly this idea: transformation, not suppression. Don't break the negativity. Conquer the negativity and harness it for positivity. And now we'll see how this feeds back into the story of Yaakov when he left Be'er Sheva, running away from making that truce with Avimelech. You see, when he made that truce, those truces that were made by Avraham and Yitzchak, his father and his grandfather, with Avimelech, what was that? The battles between, the struggle between Avimelech, or the people, the Philistines, and Abraham, and the Philistines and Isaac, wasn't just that narrow micro story of their fight, but it showed on the greater picture, the struggle between the forces of negativity and the forces of positivity, the forces of evil and the forces of good. The Philistines versus Avraham and Yitzchak. That's what it was, a greater macro picture of it, a cosmic struggle between those 2 sides. That's what it was. And what did they accomplish, Avraham and Yitzchak, and what were they satisfied with? Suppression, a truce, a ceasefire, which by default means both sides are equal. Both sides are still exactly where they were beforehand. They just agreed to put down their arms. Still at war with each other. They still don't agree with each other. They still don't understand each other. It's a ceasefire. They're 2 opposites. It's suppression. Yaakov was all about transformation. Yaakov was going to change the world. Yaakov was going to have 12 sons who will all be true to God and to devoted to what God wanted, who will ultimately be the parents of the Jewish nation till this very day, those tasked with being a light unto the nations and to transform the world to a better place. Yaakov can't be satisfied with suppression. Jacob says, the truce is not for me. I can't be here in Be'er Sheva, in the city of making a truce, of making a ceasefire, of taking that oath with Avimelech and the Philistines. That's not for me. I got to run away from it as fast as I can because suppression is not where it's at. I am all about transformation. That's who Yaakov was. And that's why he had to run away from the truce. Text 12, the words of the Rebbe. Avraham and Isaac's servants were such that the forces of evil were repelled so that they should not be an obstruction, but they were not transformed into holiness. Avraham and Yitzchak were satisfied. Abraham and Isaac were satisfied with a mere truce, with suppression. because that's what their mission entailed. That's what they were put here on this world. That's where they wanted to accomplish. And spreading good, don't bother me. I'm not going to work on you, but just don't interfere, don't obstruct. But that's not who Yaakov was. That's who Avram and Yitzchak were. That was Avram's mission. Avram successfully impacted the world, says the great sage Rabbi Yitzchak Isaac of Hummel, who was a disciple of a number of Chabad rabbis. He was a great sage in his own right. He lived in the early 19th century. And he writes, Avram successfully impacted the world, imparting the message that God is master of the universe. But the impact was only temporary. For this faith was only preserved among the members of Avram's family, but not the world around them. We don't find Jews from the times of Avram. The only Jewish people was Avram himself, his wife, and his son Isaac. So yes, Avram impacted the world in bringing about the concept of monotheism throughout the entire world, inspiring people to recognize the concept of monotheism. But no one took the plunge because it was a temporary change. Because Avram was satisfied with suppression. Avram was satisfied with the temporary change. And the same with Yitzchak. And that's why Yitzchak and Avram, Abraham, and Isaac were satisfied with the truce and said it's a good thing to have a truce with Avimelech. Came along Jacob. And Jacob said, It's not about suppression. It's not about putting the negativity aside, breaking the negativity, keeping it out so it shouldn't obstruct us. It's about transforming, about conquering the negativity. It's about making the world a better place by harnessing the negativity and utilizing it for goodness, utilizing it for holiness. And that's why he had to run away from Be'er Sheva. And where did he run to Haran? What was Haran? Haran was the lowliest, the most negative place. It was the home of the negative forces of the time. He went into the fire to go transform it into holiness. And it's actually what he accomplished. There in Haran, without a truce, he transformed the place. And he created the foundation of the Jewish nation. That was the way Avram and Isaac served God. But by contrast, Jacob's way was to completely transform evil. As such, he couldn't make a peace agreement with Avimelech as he was in his current evil state. And that's why he had to run away. And so to get back to our original question with prison reform, it's the same idea. Is it about suppression or is it about transformation? Torah seems to suggest it's about transformation. Interestingly to note, there is no prison sentencing anywhere in the Torah. There is a prison in the Torah mentioned for cases of uncertainty until the court or until Moses in one specific case will get directive from God on what to do with this specific case. So just for that time being, kind of keep him out of trouble, if you will. But there's no prison as a punishment in and of itself, because that's counter to the creation of human being. The purpose why God puts people on this world is for them to change the world, to make the world a better place. By putting a person behind bars, we are incapacitating them to fulfill their mission in this world. It can't be that that's the ultimate. It can't be that that's the proper punishment. And so there is no such punishment in Torah. If times dictate, Maimonides explains that if it's necessary, if someone has become such a menace to society that is necessary, so in certain far and fetched and in between cases, it's necessary to do it. But overall, there isn't such a condition. And that's precisely this reason, because there has to be a greater focus on working on transformation and not on suppression. Now, obviously, we're not holding on that level. Thank God we're not, we don't deal with prisoners, hopefully. There is those who do work with prisoners. It's actually a tremendous, some of you may have heard of it, the Aleph Institute, which is a Chabad organization that works with prisoners and, interestingly enough, our servicemen and women throughout the world to ensure their education, Jewish commitment, Jewish needs are met. And they work with those behind bars and their families to with whatever they may need. And the purpose really is this transformative goal, not just suppression, but actually to transform them, to give them a greater understanding of what their mission in life is, to make them a better person. This idea of transformation, perfect, ultimate transformation, will happen with the coming of Mashiach. The future redemption will come specifically through transformative Jacob-like efforts. As we work throughout this exile to transform the negativity of the world around us, we become worthy of the third temple with the coming of the Mashiach. Our sages say that the temple will not be associated with Abraham, who is associated with a mountain. When the verse refers to Avram in association with Mount Moriah, the temple mountain refers to it as a mountain. Nor Isaac, who is associated with a field, refers to the temple mount as a field. Rather, with Jacob, the building of the third temple, which will be eternal, following the transformative era of the coming of Mashiach, is associated specifically with Jacob, who is associated with the house. He refers to the temple mount as a house, a permanent structure. Because through transformation, which is what Jacob was all about, is how you reach a permanent change. May we merit the time of world peace speedily. And so, personally speaking, we have to look at ourselves and say, yes, we have these negative character traits. We may meet other people who are in a negative place. How do we change them? How do we change ourselves? Do we change it by suppression? Or do we take a page out of Jacob's book and say we have to change it by transformation? It's a lot harder, but it's a lot longer lasting. So a swift consequence for ourselves or for others may be easy, may work, but it only works short term. Transformation is to see the potential in everything and harness it for the good. It's long, but it's long lasting.